Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today, we're telling the story of a pretty amazing woman from Denver, and her name is Kate Ferretti.
Yeah, this will be a fun one.
Yeah, and so, like I said, she's from Denver, so she's a Denver Italian, and she left quite a mark on the fashion industry, and you could say brought more of a European flair to Denver's fashion scene back in the day. I actually ran across her because I teach fourth grade. And part of our social studies curriculum is Colorado history in fourth grade. And our students will take on a character and we do like a wax museum. And so they find a famous Coloradan and they put together a little poster board about the person and then dress up as the person. And Kate Ferretti is on the list. And that's how I learned about her. So
nice.
And actually, it's funny because, at the end of the school year is when we had our little wax museum with the fourth graders. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do a script on her this summer. So I start kind of diving into her. And later this month, the Littleton Museum in the Denver area is actually having a museum exhibit on her. So.
Oh, that would be interesting to go see.
Yeah. So if you live in the Denver area, I think it starts June 27th is what I saw.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Check it out online.
Exactly.
They might show something online.
Online, yeah. Maybe we'll make a short trip to Denver.
That'd
be
better.
Fun. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into this. So Kate was born Henrietta Malnati on January 3rd, 1891. And her parents were Enrico, but he went by Henry, and Louisa. And they actually grew up together in Varese, Italy. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Childhood sweethearts, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Made it to Colorado.
Yep. So at the age of 20, Henry, he entered the Italian army and served 2 years. And when he got out of the army, he immediately went home and proposed to Louisa, and they were engaged to be married. But he told Louisa that he wanted to go to America to live there and start their family. So before their wedding, he decided that he would come to America and check it out first before he brought Louisa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's quite the trip.
He
have to go back too.
And he makes it a couple of times, so he does quite a bit. But he traveled to America and somehow ended up in Colorado. I don't know what drew him to Colorado. This is late 1800s, like 1880s, so probably work. And he would later tell Louisa that he absolutely fell in love with America/Colorado. And he explained that the climate in Colorado and the mountains reminded him of Italy. So during the time Henry was in Colorado, the state capitol was actually being built. And he started working for the Seary brothers, who were contracted to help build the capitol. And so after working and living in Colorado for a few weeks, he decided, yep, this is it. I'm going to go back, marry Louisa, and bring her back. So he travels back to Italy, took a few weeks off, and they got married. They were married on November 8th, 1888. And after their wedding, Henry still left Louisa in Italy because he didn't actually have a home set up in Colorado. And, he didn't want to bring his new wife over to Colorado without a home.
That's a lot because they had to go by boat.
I know. It's a lot of traveling. So once back in Denver, he actually found a large 2-story white house that was right across the street from the Capitol. And so he thought, oh, that's perfect. It's right next to my work. Now, it took Louisa a while, though, to get to Colorado because 9 months after their wedding, their first child, Caesar, was born on July 27th, 1889. I don't think she wanted to travel pregnant.
Right.
And so he had to wait. He waited until the baby was born. And then he went back to Italy again to get her and the baby and bring them back to Denver. I think he was nervous to have them travel by themselves.
I was just going to say that's really nice of him, especially with her with the baby.
Yeah. And like
at that age.
Exactly. And like you said earlier, it's
Long
a boat ride.
Trip,
it took them forever. And
days and days.
Yeah, that's a little too scary. So... But once the family was back in Denver, they actually decided to turn the home into a boarding house for the construction workers because, they were working right across the street on the Capitol.
Right.
And so
that must have been a good job.
It must have been because they gave him a lot of time off. So, and so they would, this actually brought in extra income for the family. And Louisa, she would begin cooking meals for the men, do little things like sew their clothes for them and stuff. So it kind of worked out good for them.
Yeah.
And then he was working right across the street.
She's still staying at home with the baby.
And she's at home with the baby. Yeah. And he's right across the street if she needs him. So Shortly after this, they had their second child, which is the star of this episode, Kate Ferretti. Well, Kate Malnati at that point. But like I said, Kate, she was born Henrietta, but her brother always called her Kate, and that just kind of stuck. He told a teacher that this is my sister Kate, and it made Kate laugh, and so she went by Kate for the rest of her life.
It's funny how things work and why he chose
Kate.
Maybe he couldn't say Henrietta.
That's true. Maybe
I could see that.
That's well, especially because your parents have an Italian accent. Maybe it was just a hard word.
Yeah.
After that, Kate's parents, they went on to have 5 more kids, and the family stayed in Denver for a while, but then kind of moved around the country for Henry's job. They went to Sacramento, they went somewhere in Kansas, I can't remember, but kind of after those jobs ended, the family did return to Denver and permanently settled down there. Henry, he actually went on to work on the Denver Mint and the city park gates.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, pretty cool. And so once they got back to Denver and settled down, Henry actually bought 6 lots on 6th Avenue, and he built the family a brick home to live in. So this was the Villa Park neighborhood in Southwest Denver.
Yeah, I'm not for sure where.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. What Kate remembers of this is...
way west.
So, yeah, way west, I think so.
Oh, that's probably why, like Villa Italia Plaza,
yes,
shopping mall. I'll bet it was all called that area, Villa.
I bet you're right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But Kate said that it was a beautiful home and it had a large yard for all the kids to play in. Kate, as a kid, she loved to paint and draw and just kind of create things. And she actually wanted to go to art school, but her family couldn't afford it. So, and she was little when she asked to go to art school. She was like in elementary school. Oh. But Kate, she grew up watching her mom sew most of their clothes and even make hats for them. And she later in life talked about how her mother would make all their Easter outfits, including Easter hats. And she said that her mom was just really creative and they didn't have a lot of money. And because they didn't live in the North Denver Little Italy area, they were kind of some of the only Italians in that area. So she said, kids would kind of make fun of them, but they never made fun of their clothes because their clothes were so neat. Kate, she went to school until the age of 13, and she then went to work at the Golden Eagle Dry Goods, and her older brother actually got her the job there, and she loved admiring all the dresses and the accessories that the store had. And her first job there was running checks in the workroom of the millinery and dress departments. And so millinery is the design, manufacturing, and sale of hats.
Oh,
that's kind of, like a tailor does suits and a millinery creates hats. And so Kate would just kind of always hang around the millinery workroom and watch the ladies work. So she worked for Madame Lily. Madam was typically a title of respect given to a senior saleswoman or a head of a specific department. And so Kate, she really looked up to Madame Lily. And one day, Madame Lily asked her if she wanted to learn how to make hats since she was always hanging around the workshop. And Kate obviously accepted. And she actually worked under Madame Lily for 2 years. Kind of got her foot in the door there. Making hats, yep. And after that, Kate went to the Denver Dry Goods store and she worked under Madame Rossi. And she said Madame Rossi would go to Europe twice a year to get ideas for what was in fashion. And she just thought, at that young of an age, like, oh my gosh, how cool is that? Because she's 15 here. And she worked for Madame Rossi for about 2 years. And then she went and worked at Villa de Paris on 16th Street, where she made more money. I think she was bringing in $5 a week at this point, which I didn't do the conversion, but I'm sure that's a lot. And was able to really learn more about the trade. And she enjoyed this job so much that she actually worked for this shop for about 7 or 8 years. It was a very high-end store and pretty big clients would go in there and they'd have like big requests for hats, and we'll get into...
That's pretty neat.
It's pretty cool. So while working there, she actually gained a really large following. Women were really liking the way that she made hats. In fact, I was just talking about some of her customers. She actually had a pretty famous customer, Molly Brown, the unsinkable Molly Brown.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Everybody knows her.
Molly Brown's godmother, her name was Mary O'Shea. Everybody called her Old Mary. She kind of ran the millinery shop at the Villa de Paris.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why Molly Brown would always come in to the shop.
Funny, they call her Old Mary.
I know, right? Well, Kate said that she would always have her gray hair like tied up in a bun, and she would wear a long black dress that just all the way to the floor. And so she probably looked very, very old. But yeah, so that's why Molly Brown would always come in, because her godmother worked there. Molly Brown, she'd come in and she'd give old Mary $100 bill every time she came in. And Kate said that always stuck with her.
Oh, I'm sure. That's a lot of money back then.
It is. And at this time, Molly Brown, she was actually living in Leadville. And so she would come up and stay at the Brown Palace, for a couple of weeks. And Kate said that there was times where she'd be in like 2 or 3 times a week. And every time she came in, she gave her godmother $100 bill.
Wow.
That's crazy. Kate actually made Molly Brown 3 hats that were pretty famous. Molly Brown wanted a leopard sailor looking hat. So Kate made that. And Molly Brown loved it so much that she went to another shop in Denver and had a custom skirt made to match the hat.
All leopard?
All leopard.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty
bold.
Yeah. I was trying to find the word for that back then.
Yeah, that's a bold pattern to wear.
Yeah.
And then she also had Kate make her a brown felt hat with a white seagull on the front. And I'm sure this wasn't a full-size white seagull, probably just sized down. And she also made Molly Brown a white Easter hat that had shades of violet throughout it.
Oh, that was probably pretty.
Yeah, and some of these hats, they've replicated them. And Molly Brown's home is a museum. You and I have been there.
Right.
In Denver, and some of these hats are on display there.
Oh.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But during this time, Kate, she really, like I said earlier, she really loved working at this shop. She met her best friend while working there. Her name was Louise. And they would spend so much time together. She said after work, they'd go to amusement parks with their boyfriends, just go run around, be teenagers. And Kate remembered how her and Louise would giggle and think that it was so kind of out there because they would make hats for the girls that worked in the red light district in Denver. And so, keep in mind, they're 15, 16, and they're like, oh my gosh. And so Kate said that these women would come in and sometimes they would buy hats around, $20 to $35, which
that's a lot.
That's a lot of money. And sometimes these women would pay $200 to $300 for hats that they wanted custom made. And so,
Christmas was good.
Exactly. Yeah. And she said that her and Louise would make these hats. And then the craziest thing for her was when they would go deliver them. She talked about how she didn't want to tell her mom that she was delivering these hats. And she said that one thing she remembers is she'd go up and they were always so fancy, but these women would be like smoking really large cigars. And that was just not something that you saw.
Right.
Kate did say later on that her mom found out, but she was surprised because her mom was not mad about it. She was like, well, it's just part of your business, so it shows she trusted Kate. But during this time, her best friend introduced her to her future husband, Jacob Ferretti. So Jacob and Kate were married on April 10th, 1917 in Denver, and they moved into a little bungalow on Tejon Street. And Kate said that it was brand new and she just fell in love with this little house. It was her first house after getting married. And Kate continued to work at the shop downtown on 16th Street until she started having babies. And then she quit and stayed home to take care of the babies. But however, a lot of her old customers would track her down and say, hey, I loved the way that you made hats. Could you make this hat for me? So she would start making hats just every once in a while in between taking care of babies and stuff. She had high-end customers from this shop who really loved her. So Jacob and Kate's first child was a little girl named Anne Louise, and she was born in 1918. And their second child was also a daughter that they named Virginia. But unfortunately, when she was 3 years old, her appendix erupted and little Virginia passed away in the hospital. So, yeah. And, this understandably was really hard on Kate, and she kind of fell into a depression. She would still work and take care of Anne, but it was just hard for her to get out of that, understandably.
Right, yeah.
But she said that when she found out that she was pregnant again, she started coming around because, she had another baby. And good. Now this pregnancy would be pretty significant to Denver because Kate would give birth to Denver's first recorded triplets.
Really?
Yeah.
The first?
The first recorded, somebody might have had triplets, but this was the first recorded. So, and when these babies were born, the newspapers wanted so badly to interview Kate and take pictures of the babies, but Kate was very protective and refused to let the press around her babies. It wasn't until the babies were a lot older that she allowed their pictures to be taken by the newspapers.
Wow, triplets.
Triplets, yeah. And so this is 1926 when the triplets were born. And so Kate had no idea that she was having triplets because, they didn't have the technology. When Kate went into labor, she actually refused to go to the hospital. She wanted to have her baby at home because she didn't want to go back to the hospital because that's where Virginia died. And so she was like, nope, I'm staying home to have this baby. Well, the nurse or the midwife, whoever was there, obviously when the first baby was born, they were like, oh, there's more babies in there. I think we need to go to the hospital. Like, this is not what we were expecting. And, in 1926, that could get a little dangerous. But Kate refused. She said, nope, I'm having these babies here. Plus, getting up in the middle of labor. That's what I was going to say. Hold on. Exactly. And so all three were actually born at home. And Kate said that she was like, we didn't have anywhere to put these babies. We had one bed, carriage, crib, whatever. She's like, so when the babies were being born, they would put towels in the bathtub and put one baby there while they delivered the next baby. And because they weren't expecting that. So
I've heard of people putting them in dresser drawers.
Yes, exactly. Like just to have like a place for them. You're not expecting that. And so the first triplet born was a little girl that they named Joan. And then two little boys were born after Joan, and their names were Jack and Joseph.
All J's.
All J's, yep. Kind of after their dad, Jacob, probably. And so Kate would actually tie different colored ribbons on their fingers to tell them apart. Probably just the boys, obviously, but
that's cute.
The triplets, they made the newspaper in May of 1931, which was their 5th birthday. And the paper reported how each triplet wanted their own cake, and Kate remarked that this would make the table very crowded. So, and a few months later, in September, when the triplets were starting kindergarten, they actually made the paper again. And the headline from the Rocky Mountain News read, "How will the teacher tell Ferretti triplets apart?" And so the reporter said that the kids were so excited to start school at Smedley Elementary. There's also a really adorable picture that we'll post on social media of the 3 kids holding hands and wearing their little school outfits because they were so excited. But 6 months later, tragedy struck the family again in March of 1932. Little Joan, she came down with strep throat. And sadly, she just kept getting sicker and sicker. Doctors would come to the house, but nothing seemed to help. So Joan was admitted to the hospital, but shortly after entering the hospital, she passed away from pneumonia.
Oh,
yeah.
That's too bad. And how old was she?
5. Oh. And she'd only been in kindergarten like 6 months.
Oh, that's sad.
And so Kate was obviously devastated. And she later told a reporter, quote, "That's what threw me right into the millinery business." So she just needed something to keep her mind off of it because it's her second child.
Right.
And so her business, it really took off after this. One of her first big jobs was making like 25 hats for the Junior Service League. All of her hats sold immediately. And then, of course, her customers that she had for years, when they heard that she was full-time making hats, they all came back to her.
So is this on her own or
on her own?
Oh, okay.
Yep. So they actually glassed their front porch in, and that's where Kate had her business to start off with. Wow. Yeah. Because, it's that little brick bungalow. They always have those pillars and stuff. They just glassed them in. Yeah. Her business took off so fast that she actually had to hire like 3 or 4 girls to help her. Isn't that crazy?
And this is at the house on Tejon.
On Tejon, yep. So, but Kate, she found that her demand, it was so large and so quick. She had trouble keeping up. And the other thing that she struggled with was getting all the materials that she needed in Denver. So her and her daughter, Anne, would go to New York twice a year to load up on materials that Denver just didn't have. They had different types of feathers, like peacock feathers and exotic feathers that she would use in her hats that she just couldn't get in Denver. So,
oh, wow. And they brought all that stuff back.
She told a story. She actually told this story quite a bit. So one time her and her daughter went to New York, and actually she took all the kids because the World's Fair was being held there. And so she was like, I'm taking the kids for 2 weeks. We're going to do the World Fair for the first week. And then the second week, I'm going to go buy all of my materials. And I guess her husband looked at her and was like, you're crazy. And she was like, I know, but I do what I want.
That's funny.
And so they went up there and, she had all of these orders in for hats, but they were still being made. So she hadn't been paid for them. So she actually owed a store in New York $750. And the managers were like, we can't let you buy this other materials until you pay us for the past stuff. And she was like, well, I can't pay you if I don't have materials to make my hat. So what do you want to do? And she said that the 2 men looked at each other and were like, okay, fine, just take the stuff. And she was like, I had them paid off very quickly. I just, but she was making her hats and she didn't get paid until the hats were done.
Right.
So, and she needed more materials. So
makes sense.
It does. Yep. Now, eventually her business got so big that Kate actually bought a carriage house / barn that was across the street from their house for her growing business. And at this time, Anne was really starting to help Kate make her hats. And Kate said that she was a natural. So her and her daughter were kind of working together. And
that's nice.
Yeah. And they were like, we need more room. So, and her new shop was actually described as the only millinery shop in the country that looks like a Paris shop. Because, she decorated it.
Yeah,
and
she's just that type of.
Exactly.
Well, most people that are in that business are like that. So.
Yeah, they are. Now, Kate lived in North Denver, which is known as Little Italy at that time. And her shop was on Tejon Street. And all of her rich, fancy clients, they would come to her little shop to buy their hats. Like, she would not travel to them. She wanted them to come to her so that she could show them the materials and they can kind of pick their hats.
Where was this at? Do you know what avenue?
It's more Sunnyside neighborhood. So like 40...
Yeah. It's up
42nd.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry if you're not a Denver listener. If you're a Denver listener, you probably got all of that. So, like I said, so this was Little Italy and all of her rich clients would come to her. So Kate actually had to buy another lot for their cars because all of these women would come in chauffeured fancy cars down to Little Italy and they would park and go into her shop. And at one point, someone actually turned Kate into the police thinking that she was a bootlegger.
Well, Little Italy.
Little Italy. You've got all these fancy cars pulling up to your house. And so 2 investigators actually came and knocked on her door one day and asked to search her house. And she asked them what they were searching for. And they told her that they just needed to search her house. I guess warrants weren't really a big thing then. And Kate said that she was like, fine, come in and search my house. And she probably had an inclination of what they were there for. But Kate said that her and her husband didn't drink. So the investigators couldn't find anything. And I'm sure she explained to them, like, I make hats. I have all these fancy women coming with their drivers. So now Kate, she actually had her eye on another house that was on Tejon Street. And she absolutely loved this house. She desperately wanted to buy it. And I guess it was, this is like 1930s. And the house at that time was really old. It was one of the old homestead houses.
Oh, wow.
And so it was completely run down. It was a boarding house at one point, but she saw the beauty in it. And she kept telling her husband, she's like, I'm going to buy that house one day. I'm going to buy that house one day. And I think he always looked at her like,
you're crazy.
You're crazy. And she said, I'm going to do it. I don't care what you say. And so finally, one day it came up for sale and she bought it and she completely, what we would call today, flipped the home and made it their new home. So she said it was...
so they moved in.
They moved in. Yep. She wanted it for their house. So she said that it was so fancy and it had beautiful woodwork throughout the house. And so she left a lot of the original stuff, but added her own flair to it. She loved it because it had these beautiful glass sliding doors that separated the rooms. And this will give you an idea of how big the house was. It had glass doors that separated the dining room from the living room and the living room from the library.
Wow, that would be fun to see.
Wouldn't that be so cool? Yeah, she said it was just very ornate. And so she left a lot of that kind of stuff, but she painted the outside pink because that was her favorite color.
Wow.
And she put in a beautiful flower garden in the front.
It would be fun to go see that house, it is now.
Actually, that's what we'll get into next. So for our Denver listeners, again, the address is 4245 Tejon Street. And I actually looked it up, and I think the house has been torn down, according to Google Maps. I know.
Really?
Yeah. In one interview, Kate said that it was catty corner from Chancho Park. And on Google Maps, the lot that is catty corner from that park is empty. You can tell it's just nothing's there, but it used to be a home.
That's kind of shocking for being such a fancy house in the 30s.
I know.
That somebody just tore it down.
Tore it down, and nothing's there. And I don't know when it got torn down. It could have been in the last 5 years. Because I'm just looking at Google Maps, but you can see the addresses in 4245. You can tell where it should be, and there's just an empty lot. And it makes sense because she said it was catty corner.
Right.
So, but Kate said that she actually sold the house, kind of when she retired, but she was really upset because they built a 7-Eleven around the corner. And she was like, it was just not the same neighborhood anymore, and I couldn't deal with it. And and I even on Google Maps, I don't see the 7-Eleven there anymore either. This was in the 70s when she said that she was upset about the 7-Eleven. So, but just kind of interesting. However, Kate's business, it continued to flourish, and she would go to Europe periodically for materials and inspiration. And she would always take Anne with her, and they'd go to fashion shows and stuff. And her customers, they were primarily in Denver, but she actually had a few customers from around the country. For example, one woman would come to Denver from Dallas and would buy hats from her.
Yeah.
So she had quite a following.
I'm sure she was popular.
And one thing, actually, it's funny that you say that, because one thing that Kate, I think, helped her become popular was she had a sense for what the fashion world would look like in the future. She could almost guess, like, the next season, I bet this will be in fashion. And most of the time she was right. In fact, it was said that many designers would wait to see what Kate bought in New York before they started designing their own hats. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Now, in the 1950s, her business, the carriage house that she turned into her shop, it was actually threatened by the city because the city council, it wanted to rezone areas to make it strictly residential and not allow businesses. But luckily, Kate had some friends who helped her through this, and she was allowed to keep her business open in North Denver. I think she was kind of grandfathered in.
Yeah. Well,
so, and she even told the city council that her house business, it was beautiful and it didn't distract or take anything away from the neighborhood. And now in December of 1958, Kate's husband, Jacob, he passed away at the age of 82. He was born in 1876, so he was a few years older than Kate. We haven't talked a whole lot about him. Yeah. But he was a gourmet chef, and Kate said that he would work from like 3 a.m. till 2 at restaurants preparing meals and stuff.
Wow.
But then he would come home, and she remembers like how he always made their family wonderful meals because she was, she was working in her shop. So
yeah.
In the early 1960s, one of the triplets, Jack, he married a woman named Maria Betty, and she was actually from Italy. And Maria, she would model the hats that Kate made. And she would be in, the Denver newspapers and stuff for an advertisement.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Wow, keeping it in the family.
Exactly. And Maria, she was actually a model in Italy, and that's how her and Jack met. So Jack, he would go to Italy for fashion shows to help his mother, and he saw Maria, and one thing led to another, and they ended up in Denver. However, I think Maria, she missed her family, and I think she missed Italy because in 1967, the couple actually moved back to Florence, Italy. But Jack, he planned to still be a part of his mother's shop because being in Italy, he could help her like, hey, these are the fashion trends, or he would send materials to her.
Oh, okay.
By the late 1960s, early 1970s, hats were kind of starting to fall out of fashion. This made me laugh because Kate said, well, women, they didn't want to mess up their high piled hair because if you think of like the beehive hairdo.
Yeah, the hairdos were changing.
Exactly. They weren't really conducive to hats. Another thing that Kate said that made me laugh was, say what you want about neatly turned ankles or a big bosom. Nothing catches a man's eye faster than a beautiful hat.
Wow, that's quite a quote.
It is. But Kate said that she could tell her business was not as busy as it usually was unless it was Easter. She still had a high demand for hats at Easter, which that makes sense.
Right.
Little Easter hats. Kate, she retired in 1973, and her children took over the business until they retired. And she also ended up selling her home on Tejon Street. As she retired and she got older, it was just too much. Right. And her husband had passed away. And she moved to an apartment on South Marion Street. And her apartment was said to basically portray everything that she loved. It had pictures of her family, flowers, fancy furniture, and hats, of course.
Oh, sure.
She said that even in 1973, after she retired, she still would get calls almost every day to make hats for a custom hat for someone. And occasionally she would make one, but her doctor would become upset with her because she had had 2 heart attacks in 1 year. And
oh, boy.
He was like, you gotta slow down.
Yeah.
Now, at the age of 96,
wow. She made it to 90.
To 96, yep. So she passed away on May 3rd, 1987. And she's remembered as one of Denver's great entrepreneurs, especially a woman entrepreneur, and helping to shape the fashion scene in Denver.
Yeah, I'm sure she was very proud of that.
Oh, for sure. And I kind of want to end on a quote that I found of hers. So on May 9th, 1975, she was interviewed by the American Association of University Women. And towards the end of the interview, she told the reporter, quote, "I loved every minute of my life. It just flew away. That's all."
Oh, wow.
I know. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, sad.
It's sad, yeah. But like you said, 96, that's a pretty good life. But there are some amazing pictures that we'll post, pictures of her and her kids. And I'm going to see if I can go through some of the archives and find a picture of that house on Tejon that she loved. It'd be so cool to have that.
Yeah.
There's one picture where she's like at the carriage house where her business was across the street. Yeah. And she's standing at the door, like letting a customer in. And you can see all the flowers and stuff. I'll post that one. But gosh, if I could find a picture of the house that she painted pink, how cool would that be?
Yeah. Still blows me away that it's not there.
I know. It makes you wonder if, it had like major problems. And who knows?
Yeah, whoever bought it could have just let it go to disrepair.
Exactly. I saw somewhere in an interview with her that she said it went to like a construction company and they turned it into offices. But I don't know if she was talking about the home or the carriage house. So, but yeah, we'll post as many pictures as we can. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, follow the podcast wherever you listen. And we hope you enjoyed listening to the incredible story of Kate Ferretti. And we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.